Yes, Dave. There you go. Do I have to do it again? No. Okay, please call the roll.
Councilor Kaiser, absent. Councilor Anderson.
Present.
Councilor Nanki, absent. Councilor McCoid.
Present.
Councilor Ossick.
Here.
Councilor Hoy.
Here.
Councilor Cook, absent.
Here.
Oh,
Nice timing.
Councilor Lewis.
Here.
Mayor Bennett, absent.
Join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, Councilor Anderson, I need to do a motion for approval of the special meeting agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the special meeting agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Now we get to... Okay, now, Councilor Anderson, I need a motion to designate a presiding officer for the...
Yes, I move that Councilor Hoy be designated as the presiding officer, especially for the joint work session that'll happen after this meeting.
Second.
Moved and second to appoint, I guess, elect Councilor Hoy as the presiding officer of the special meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, now we get to, we have any councilor, city manager comment? No? I have a comment. I want to thank the councilors here for 4 years of camaraderie, friendship. Thank you for the patience and the good humor, and keep doing the job you do. I know the one thing that's impressed me with this council is they're prepared. They do their homework, they read their stuff, they come to this meeting ready to discuss the issues, and that's a good thing for the city. So I thank you for your friendship. I hope that continues. If you need a partner for a drink or lunch, give me a call. I'm retired. So thank you.
How about right now?
Well, I could adjourn the meeting. I'm still in charge. So we need a moval. Councilor Hoy, you have a motion for me.
I do. I move the City Council adopt the order reversing the planning administrator's decision and deny the Class 3 site plan review and Class 2 driveway approach permit as contained in Attachment 1.
Moved by Councilor Hoy, seconded by Councilor Ossick to basically approve the staff recommendation. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Aye.
Whoa, I'm sorry. I'm on a roll. I'm on my way out of here. Did you catch that? Councilor Lewis is a no? Okay, hearing that, no more business to be had, I declare this special meeting of the City Council adjourned.
Call this meeting, or the work session of the Salem City Council to order. If the clerk will call the roll.
Councilor Kaiser? Absent. Councilor Anderson?
Present.
Councilor Nanki? Absent. Councilor McCoid? Absent. Councilor Ossick?
Here.
Councilor Hoy?
Here.
Councilor Cook?
Here.
Councilor Lewis?
Here.
Mayor Bennett? Absent. We also have commissioners from Marion County. Commissioner Carlson?
So we'll open our own meeting, if that's all right with you? Okay. So we'll open a meeting of the Marion County Board of Commissioners. We generally do not take roll because there's just 3 of us. But we will introduce ourselves. So I'm Janet Carlson, Commissioner.
Sam Brentano, Commissioner.
And Kevin Cameron, Commissioner.
And then with us, we have our legal counsel, Jane Vetto. Brian May will be introduced later, and Dennis Mansfield.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here, Commissioners. We really appreciate this opportunity to learn about solid waste that impacts all of us in both of our jurisdictions. So I'm really looking forward to this evening and having a good open exchange of information and learning. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
And we thank the city for putting this together. And Councilor Hoy, I think you and I kind of cooked this up in a prior conversation, so
Yeah.
I'm glad it's finally coming to fruition.
Definitely. And if I could have a motion for approval of additions and deletions to the agenda?
So moved?
Second.
And so there are no additions or deletions? Do we want to discuss public comment?
Yes.
I thought so, Councilor Anderson.
We usually have it under Mayor Bennett, but it's a joint meeting, so I think we have to come to some joint decision. If we were to have public comment, it would be at the end of all the presentation and at the end of council discussion, not before. So if we need a motion, I'll make it. If we can do it by consensus, I think that's a matter between the Mayor Pro Tem or the Council President Pro Tem or the guy who's running the meeting and the county commissioners.
So I'll open it up for commissioners. What is your perspective on that?
Well, I would just say typically in a work session, we do not have public comment. That would be for a board session when we have public comment, when we're making decisions. This is just a work session to educate and talk about the things that we do. We were asked to come here to present, and I think that's, from 6 to 7:30, that was the plan that was on the agenda, so. If the city council wants to have public comment at some point in time, they're welcome to do that. Go ahead, Sam.
I yield to Commissioner Carlson. Please do. You don't know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't know. I can't read
The
the
thought
mind,
that
sorry.
let's have our presentation and discussion first and see if that provides the education that we intended it, and then let the questions come with some information as a background. Would be my favorite.
So another option would be too, I think, if there's a concern about that public comment would take us past 7:30, how would the council feel about having the public comment directed towards the city council as opposed to the commissioners if they needed to go other places?
If you needed to excuse yourselves at 7:30, I think that would be fine.
So my suggestion is we just put that matter on hold till we see where we are
Okay.
when we're toward the end of the meeting.
I know I've seen the PowerPoint presentation, there's a lot of information. This is a very complex issue. So I just said I don't want to be here till midnight, so we just figure out kind of how we do this.
So we'll put that off then until later in the meeting. I do think the city council then will need to vote on the motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye. To approve the agenda. Sorry. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thanks. And I
Do you
will
want
turn-
us to approve the agenda too? Okay, so the commissioners, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
It's approved.
And now we'll turn it over to Mr. Zink to introduce the topic and get us moving.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Zink. I am the franchise administrator for the city of Salem. Again, I want to thank you for joining us this evening for this joint work session between City Salem Council and Marion County Commissioners. I'm going to do just a little bit of housekeeping, some introductions, and then I'm going to get our presentation started. First of all, I want to let's see here. A lot of things out of here last minute. I apologize. I'm going to introduce the other co-presenters that we'll have this evening. So obviously myself, we'll have Brian May. Oh, sorry. I lost you for a second there. So I'll have Brian May and Dennis Mansfield, both from Marion County Public Works, will be doing the lion's share of the presenting this evening. We also have Matt Marler from Covanta will be presenting a piece that's specific to Covanta. So we'll have an expert in the room on that. We also have another fairly large panel of experts that will be at your disposal after the presentation for kind of the Q&A and discussion. Those include Jeanette Nelliton from DNO, Art Kinsey from Suburban Garbage, Julie Jackson from Republic Services. We also have Kathy Rhodes from the Department of Environmental Quality, Will Postgate from Garton, Galen McAllister also from Garton, and we have Reed Carlson from Mid-Valley Garbage and Recycling Association. So those folks will be here. Those are all parts of the, all those organizations are parts of the solid waste system. And so hopefully, if we have some questions this evening, they'll be here to help answer that as well. I also wanted to just provide kind of some additional context that as you are well aware, that state law generally allows local governments and solid waste collectors to transport solid waste to any disposal site at their discretion. However, ORS 459 does provide special legislation for Marion County to require that people who generate, collect, and transport solid waste within Marion County can only do that to county designated disposal sites. So that's kind of the large context, kind of those sidebars that we have to work within, and that kind of helps put some sidebars on the conversation this evening. And just as a side note, Metro up in Portland is the only other solid waste area within the state of Oregon that also has that same designation. So again, before I get started, I just really want to kind of open up as we're going through the presentation. If there's a question that comes up, feel free to stop us or the presenter. We want to make this interactive. It's a collaborative effort to really get to understand the solid waste system here in Salem and the larger area of Marion County, and to some respect the state of Oregon as well. And so feel free to stop us, ask some questions. There will be some natural places to do that as well, but don't hesitate if something comes up. If you have a question, to please do that. So as we're moving along, kind of the basis for this presentation, where we started, was a large number of questions that were coming up from council, from public testimony of why this, why that, and how does this system work, and that type of thing. So I'm just going to go through kind of what to expect in the presentation, that the answers or the questions that we hope to answer. And so that'll be kind of our checklist at the end, is did we answer those questions for you? This first group of questions actually is answered in a report that was recently put together on behalf of Marion County, called it's a Solid Waste and Energy Report by GBB, and I apologize, I don't remember the acronym for GBB, but it's a company who put it together. I'm sure Brian can do that for you here in a moment. But those questions within that report that can be answered is, what is an integrated solid waste system, for starters? Who are the key partners in this system? Where does the material go? What is the capacity of the solid waste system? What do we need for the future? Additional questions are, what are tipping fees, and are they going to increase in the future? Why are the garbage collection rates different from Polk County and Marion County for Salem residents? And do energy from waste and landfilling affect the environment? Or excuse me, how do they affect the environment? So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Brian and let him tell you more. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Good evening, Commissioners. Again, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that. And I've already been scolded by my commissioners not to get too carried away. I do love garbage and recycling, so I count on them to tell me to whoa. So please feel free to jump in anytime.
We're all looking.
I know. I don't know. So we'll jump kind of right into this. We really want to kind of give that overview of our solid waste system in Marion County and some of its complexities, and kind of shed some light on some of those questions that Ryan touched on. And GBB report, as Ryan referred to it, Gershman, Brickner, and Bratton. So now you understand why we kind of call it GBB report. It kind of gives a good sense of what our system looks like. This was commissioned to look at the system in preparations for our contract negotiations with Covanta. A lot of things we wanted to evaluate is kind of our system, its alternatives, what can we do, how can we improve, and look at that. As we go through this, we'll talk about the integrated solid waste system, key components of that with the reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and energy and disposal. We also wanted to be a key piece of this report was the focus on trying to attain that 64% recovery goal that's been put out there, as Marion County's been in the top 2 in recovery rate within the state, and we're very proud of that. And we want to have a comprehensive look at our programs, how they're managed, make sure that we contain the system, we use it appropriately, and address the concerns of the constituents. So as we go through this, I'll kind of refer back to the report, but I guess kind of providing some detail of what is an integrated solid waste system, right? We've heard a lot of the 3 R's and everything else, but there's another component when we look at recovery, which dives into energy from waste, and then we also get into disposal and landfilling. So it's a way of making sure we get the most value of our waste. So we kind of prioritize it from the most desirable of, again, reduce, just not generate it at all, to reuse the material, and then of course recycle, recover, and dispose. So it's kind of that whole entire hierarchy, which kind of develops our whole system with education and outreach, our facilities with our transfer stations, our compost operation, our demolition landfill, again, trying to focus things to go to the appropriate locations and integrate them within the solid waste system. A big piece of that is our partners. And we have a number of key partners we want to point out as we go through, and one of those being Cavanna, Marion, Brooks. They are the kind of that lower end of the disposal spectrum, where they incinerate about 172,000 tons a year for us. Unique pieces to this is that we recover metal. We recover ferrous and non-ferrous metals. So even if somebody's setting out their curbside trash with some kind of metal components, most likely it's still going to get recovered when it goes to energy from waste facility. It's one of those unique benefits we have.
Brian, can I just interrupt you for a minute? Because
Yep.
I see people taking notes. So do you have copies of the PowerPoint? You do have copies of it? All right. Of the report, but not of the
Not of the
PowerPoint
PowerPoint.
presentation. So we can make the PowerPoint presentation available,
Available.
right?
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you.
Again, power generation is a key piece of the energy from waste facility, generating about 13 megawatts per hour of electricity. So equivalent to the city about the size of Woodburn is what's being generated on a daily basis. They've also been a strong environmental performer, and this facility is owned and operated by Cavanna.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you made a reference to per hour and then you said per day. So is it
So
the city of the size of Woodburn per day or per hour?
per hour, yes. So,
Per hour.
yep.
I just have an additional question. Could you define strong? Thank you. Could you further explain the strong environmental performance as far as any particular fines or
Yeah,
the
so-
process to get that strong environmental recommendation?
Is that you remain in good standing with the regulatory agencies, with the Department of Environmental Quality, with your Title V permitting, stormwater permitting, et cetera. Those are key pieces to that.
We have the particulate slide coming later on in the slideshow,
Yes.
too. that
Yep, so we'll
will
have
show
some
where
more
we are
detail
with different levels
as we go
of
through that. Yep.
elements.
Okay. Moving on, the Marion Resource Recovery Facility, we refer to this as the MRF. This handles a lot of the construction and demolition material that comes through the county, and the dry waste portion. This has been a growing fraction as our economy's improved through the years. This facility started out with probably about 30,000 tons a year, and we're now almost meeting or exceeding the volume that we put through Cavanta. This has allowed us some flexibility within the system for our transfer station materials to have additional recovery before it goes to its ultimate disposal location. Examples on the screen of things that we see recovered there is your electronics, batteries, metal, cardboard, concrete, tires, etc. They also process wood waste, which is also a fairly large fraction of our recovery materials within the county. This facility is actually owned and operated by the Mid-Valley Garbage and Recycling Association and operated within a franchise agreement with Marion County. Garten Recycling, they handle about 50% of our commingle or our mixed recycling that's collected from businesses and residents. It's about 12,500 tons a year, hand-picked, processed with some additional equipment processing to recover that waste stream. In addition to the Garten services needs there, they have a reuse piece that gets into electronics and tablets, et cetera. Another key portion and facilitator within our system, and they're owned and operated by Garten Services and work directly with our haulers. I mentioned the Mid-Valley Garbage and Recycling Association. This is where there's a little bit of differences between Marion County and the city. And we have, within city limits, we have 6 franchise haulers. And when we kind of go to that lower graph, it's a little tough to see there, but there's an additional 2 haulers that operate within Marion County. If we kind of expand past the Marion County borders, those franchised entities extend out into other counties also. So when you look and you kind of boil it down to City of Salem, you kind of see how the little jigsaw puzzle works and kind of fits together. It's kind of a unique piece of our system, but very key players in how we operate. One of our transfer stations, Salem Kaiser, handles about 17% of the waste generated within Marion County goes through this facility. So if you kind of think about that and the fact that there's 122,000 customers annually trying to get up off of Highway 20 into that facility, that is only to dispose. That doesn't count the recycle depot or the household hazardous waste facility also co-located at the site. So very busy. We're experiencing a lot of growth, which we'll talk about later. This facility is owned and operated by Republic Services, and there's also a franchise agreement with Marion County that they operate under. North Marion Recycling and Transfer. This is located north of Woodburn off I-5 up the corridor in the north end of the county. Not as busy as a facility, serving kind of a unique piece, about 35 customers annually. We are actually trying to educate and move and let people be aware of this facility because of the wait times associated at Skirts, Salem Kaiser. So it's not as busy, easier in and out, but it's also kind of tends to be, I hate to say, our best kept secret. It's just not as popular as we'd like it to be, but we want to kind of push some material that direction to kind of free up other spots. Also located on the site is the ash monofill, where the residual from Cavanta used to go as a primary disposal location. Today, most of that material is being trucked to Coffin Butte landfill and used for alternate daily cover, so basically getting reuse again, which is another benefit for us.
Since the commissioner said we could interrupt, and you did too, I'm going to interrupt.
Okay.
I understood Ryan Zinke to say that Chapter 459 of ORS says we have to dispose of our garbage in Marion County, and that's a question that came to mind a number of times when you're talking about Coffin Butte?
Coffin Butte.
Coffin
yes.
Butte, because that's not in Marion County. So how do we get away with that?
So it's based on the flow of direction directed by Marion County. So this material, we're again trying to move up that waste hierarchy and find the highest best use for the material. So we could entomb it here in Marion County, but to take it to that next level and get an additional use out of it, we're offsetting soil consumptions in Benton County.
Did you say entomb?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. What is the transportation cost for the life of the waste? I'm just thinking you have the original source,
Mm-hmm.
and then either at the home or business, then it's sent to the processing or the key partners, then to Covanta, then back over to another county. I'm just trying to look at the mobility of the life cycle.
So we'll address that a little later on, if you don't
good.
mind holding, so we'll get into some of the cost components. That was one of those questions that we'll
And you'll
address.
discuss how much we are charged?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So this facility is actually owned and operated by Marion County. Our Browns Island demolition landfill and compost operation, this is located just off River Road. Kind of a unique piece. Again, trying to get the highest best use for demolition material to be used here. Takes in about 55,000 yards a year. It's been growing again with the good economy as we've seen going forward. But the compost operation is kind of unique for us to have here. A lot of the material that's being composted is collected from City of Salem. So it's from business activities of the city, whether it be mowing or leaf pickup or other things. That's a lot of our volume that's handled there. In addition, we're pulling the material from that North Marion transfer station in composting, and then the trees and the trimmings and everything. A lot of the businesses in the county utilize our site. We need that kind of wood carbon source from the chipped wood as part of our compost operation. So that's the additional volume that we see that makes up our compost. again, owned and operated by Marion County, and located at an old solid waste facility, a landfill, where we have this set up. Household hazardous waste facility, as I mentioned, it's co-located out at the Salem transfer station, handle about 180 to 200,000 pounds of material a year coming from our residents for free of charge. We also take material from small businesses, small quantity generators with a fee. This facility is owned by Marion County, even though it's housed on Republic Services property, but we contract with a hazardous waste handler to deal with this material directly and take it to proper disposal. And again, the other biggest piece of this is we can't do this with our partnerships with the cities and the 20 cities within Marion County. Each of you have your own individual franchise agreements where you set collection rates from the haulers. Another component, again, in that piece we're proud of is our recovery rate, that the Opportunity to Recycle Act that kind of dictates those things that we need to do and achieve for populations over 4,000. Some new requirements within Senate Bill 263 that kind of move us from that shift of looking primarily just at disposal to more of the reduce and reuse portions are coming forward through us. And then again, as Ryan mentioned, that flow control authority that allows us to kind of contain and move those materials within the county is critical portions of the integrated solid waste system.
Brian, can I stop you for a minute there? Because I don't feel like your answer to Councilor Anderson was complete on the flow control piece. So
Okay.
Can you just give us a little bit more depth about, I know I'm the one that told you to stay at the 20,000 foot level, but would you give us a little bit more depth on the flow control authority? What exactly does flow control require? Because I don't think it requires the haulers to keep the trash or the solid waste in the county. Right,
correct.
but it does require the haulers to be directed by Marion County in terms of where they take their trash. So can you explain that in a little bit more detail?
I'll try to clear that up
Do
a
you
little
want to
bit.
explain it, Jane? Jane has the can we have legal counsel explain them?
Sure.
Right.
So
Can you talk to the microphone?
So 459-125 says that subject to some exceptions later on in the statute, that Marion County may sell, enter into short or long-term contracts, solicit bids, enter into direct negotiations, deal with brokers, or use other methods of sale or disposal for the products or byproducts of the disposal sites of the county, and require any person or class of persons who generate solid waste to make use of the disposal, transfer, or material or energy recovery sites or facilities of the county, or disposal, transfer, material or energy recovery sites or facilities designated by the county. So you're required to use the sites designated by the county, but they do not need to be in the county.
So just to continue that, take another hypothetical. Let's say the city wanted to send all its solid waste to the landfill in Benton County. Could we do that, or do we have to do that through the county and get the county's permission to do that under the statute?
I believe you have to do it through the county's permission.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Did you want to add anything? Commissioner Brentano
Well, I hate
has a
to.
historical perspective. Just asking if you wanted to explain why it was that we in Metro entered into
I'll try to
this.
make this short and keep it. I was a hauler in the days when the garbage burner was built, and this, after a vote of the people, it was really a land use issue. They used it as a, what's the right word? Mandate, I guess, to go ahead and build the garbage burner. But the notion of flow control was that to handle waste correctly, comprehensively, and do all the different blessings that I hope this presentation will show you later, and to contract with someone to build the facility, they had to guarantee a flow of waste. And this legislation was that to guarantee that the waste would be available for the huge risks the county was going to be taking on. I should also say I fought this thing very hard in those days. But once it was built, and in hindsight, I'm very, very satisfied with its performance over 30 years, and will brag about it whenever anybody asks. You
And-
wanted to ask something, go
Well,
ahead.
let me just, can I tag on and then we could take the question. The other thing, I had made a note when you were talking about Browns Island and how it used to be a landfill. So Commissioner Brentano actually did a work session where he went through the history of solid waste in Marion County in, a lot more detail, a whole hour on.
I didn't think you were listening.
I was listening on pictures and everything. And one of the things he talked about, maybe, my recollection isn't as clear as yours is that Browns Island, actually, that was our landfill, and there was stuff like floating into the river, so the Willamette River was getting polluted. So just talk about that briefly, kind of add in.
I don't know where to start then, but I thought you were going to ask different questions in terms of dollars and cents, and just, it isn't what she's asking, but we were paying like $2 or $3 a ton at the time. When the burner was built, Gary here promised if it got above $13 a ton, they would never build it. Well, it opened at $27.50, jumped to $37.50, $67.45, and I don't even know we're 80 something. But that's what it's taken to keep it going. But the landfill at Browns Island had a number of problems, and it's still there. County's still responsible to monitor it, watch it, and be willing to pay to what we call remediation if something goes wrong. My company at exactly that time, maybe the reason I was fighting against the burner, had a landfill ready to be sited up above Ankeny. Good a location as you can find here in the valley. But the public outcry was so strong, the commissioners bowed their neck and said, no, we're going to build this, and did. But we're also fully committed that if that question comes up, that there is no room. And I don't think I would be arguing against it for a landfill anywhere in Marion County. That isn't the technology that's the answer to our problems.
That's good. Question answered. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll kind of move to kind of where does this all go? So this next slide is intentionally very busy. So please don't even try to look and focus. We'll break it down and kind of get into the container, the cart, at the curb, and provide a little more detail here. So talking about garbage first, right? Again, sticking with the waste hierarchy and in our integrated system is, from a residential standpoint, what you put out the curb, our intent is to put that into the waste energy facility. The intent is, again, to recover those items, the energy, the metal, and even the ash that is now getting reused for alternate daily cover. And hopefully in the future, there's some other mechanisms and things that can be used for. But that's where we want that material to go to. So now when we go from a business standpoint, we're actually kind of looking at the streams a little differently. If it's wet and it really doesn't make sense, it's more that what you really think of garbage to be, it's heading to Cavanta also to be processed. But if it's more of a dry waste where we can actually take it through the mechanical process and through picking and put employees engaged with that, we're going to send it to the Marion Resource Recovery Facility and recover as much material as we can out of there. Again, highest best use is that driving piece to that. Again, they're looking for the metal, cardboard, wood, concrete, they even get e-waste. And then what comes out kind of at the end of that process is the residual waste, and that's what's going off to Coffin Butte today. Or if we need material at Cavanta, we actually bring that back into the facility as we go forward. Going to the next kind of cart at the curb, and we look at the organics cart, right? Your yard debris, your food waste. Most all that material today goes to the Marion Resource Recovery Facility, where it's reloaded and shipped to a Pacific Region compost north of Corvallis. They received the first food waste composting permit in 2010 and have been processing organics for a long time now, turning it into compost that you can buy in a bag and in other forms and in bulk. Again, if there's things in there that need to be recovered, it's being processed there at the Marion Resource Recovery Facility. And again, there is still always a fraction of waste. Even though we're trying to be good, what goes in those carts isn't always as clean. And we kind of joke it as being called the yard debris cart. So anything in your yard tends to end up in there, whether it's a shoe, a ball, or the dog's favorite toy. So. Getting into the mixed recycling cart, again, this has been a big discussion as of late with the market changes in China and the impacts. So we use kind of two different streams in a sense. We have a residential and a business. They get kind of bisected and shipped to different locations. Again, half of our material is going to Garden Services here locally in Marion County, and then the other half is going to Pioneer Recycling up in the Portland area. Again, to get as much recovery as we can and to optimize our costs associated with those. As we all talked about, it's now jugs and bottles, paper and cardboard, and then tin. And again, we still have that little waste symbol there. We'd like to think that everybody's putting in just pure recyclables into the container that can go to a final end market. That's not always true, and we're still looking at contamination levels somewhere between the 8 and almost 15% range. Going to the special recycling, right? That's that little red bin that we have at the curbside that's kind of unique to us in Marion County, where we get some of these kind of special recycling pieces where we get the glass, our paint curbside, motor oil, cooking oil, antifreeze batteries. It's kind of a neat part of our system, and it's one of those value-added components from Marion County, from the Environmental Services Fund, where we're paying for that additional processing for that material to be taken to a final market. Yep.
Thanks. I don't have a red bin. I have a blue bin where I put in glass. Is that
Blue-
the same thing?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, just checking. So I can put in more than glass. It's pretty clear. I could, anything that's on that list can go in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Republic Services, you're warned, because it's going to be more glass from now on. Yeah, good, thanks.
And most of that materials.
Batteries, too. You can do batteries.
It's up there.
Where is it?
Yep.
Oh, it's the green.
Yep.
Okay.
But I learned you have to put them in plastic bags,
Bags.
not in paper bags. I've been putting them in paper bags like I do with the,
What's the thickness of the plastic? Are we worried about that too?
I just learned this at a
How does it
neighborhood
relate
meeting the other day.
to a plastic bag used in the grocery stores, which has been on our minds lately?
All right, so kind of give an oversight of the different containers, and then want to talk about more the kind of the capacity of our system. And I'm going to explain this really kind of backwards. I want to talk about what's going into some of these key facilities. And again, lots of lines, lots of numbers. This is Cavana Marion, and part of what we're trying to illustrate here is you actually see kind of a decline in the throughput of the facility. So going kind of towards the right side, about 2016, Marion County residents were generating enough waste where we were no longer needing to import waste in to keep Cavanta full and at capacity. So kind of a unique time. And since about mid-July of 16, we have not looked back. We have a robust economy, and people just seem to be bringing it to us. I want you to keep in mind, again, highest best use, we keep Cavanta full. Let's say that. So from a Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm not clear on that. So when I see
Okay.
this graph for 2018,
Yep.
I see that your tonnage is down at the lowest point on this particular graph.
Correct.
And I'm assuming 95 is the operation date. We're not going before then at all.
Yeah, this is just a kind of a slice in time aspect, so it would be
And-
prior to that.
And then you said that we're at a space in 2018 where we no longer have to take in additional waste
Correct.
to be profitable. But then I look at previous parts of the graph, and you've definitely taken in more waste.
Right. So not to be profitable, but to have the facility run at max capacity. So so it's
Do you
full.
see how I'm struggling to
I am on
Yeah.
the same page with Councilor
Yep.
Cook. It seems like
struggling too, Brian.
we're way
I know.
below capacity. That's what I'm confused.
So the fun part when you look at incineration, you have to actually think of the waste as a commodity. Okay, so what we put in it determines how hot that fuel is, and how hot it burns determines really how much we can put in. So think of it as like your fireplace. If you're comfortable with the heat with one log, you don't put 3 or 4 or 5 and overburn. So the capacity of the facility can't handle that additional heat. So what we're finding is that our waste makeup, our waste composition is actually hotter than what it was in previous years.
So how does that relate to the operational cost and also the repairs or upkeep needed on the facility? Are we running at a lower amount because we're able to sustain the equipment longer? Or was that a decision based on finances? I'm
Right.
just really puzzled with this graph.
So we're running it based on, or actually Covanta is running it based on the heat value, which this is where I'm having trouble explaining this to you. The hotter the material burns, it requires less material to keep that heat at that design level of the facility, if that makes sense. So
why is the material hotter? Maybe you could explain that.
So we're seeing a lot more plastic. I mean, we see plastic generation. When we look at the volumes of the materials going into our pits, the pit, we see that regularly, and we see a lot of cardboard. We see a lot of these materials that just burn at a much higher rate. Wood. All these burn hotter than normal household garbage.
And I'm just going to refer back to the original question that I had in the beginning of the presentation when we talk about, you had mentioned meeting the environmental standards and showing that on the slides. I'm assuming if the fuel is burning at a hotter rate, and particularly with plastics and the different types of plastics and the off-gassing and different materials that can result, are you going to delve into that at all in this 30,000-foot presentation?
Yes. Matt's going to
Excellent.
help
I
shed
look
some light on
forward to
that for us.
I have a question before we move on, though.
Yep.
I thought what you had said is that we're at a capacity, but what I'm seeing in this graph is that we're not at capacity. So I'm still not following this conversation.
Right. I apologize for that. So Covanta, in a sense, is because of the waste makeup, that capacity fluctuates.
Oh, okay.
With the fuel that we're putting into that.
Okay.
And the fun part for Port Covanta is they don't govern what comes in as far as the fuel, right? It's what we put at our curbs, it's what we collect from our residents, what we collect from our businesses. That's what makes up that volume. So they're dealing with a robust organics collection program, which is fantastic for our recovery, but in turn it takes some of that wet material out of there.
So we're taking the wet stuff out and we're recycling less, and so it's burning hotter. And so I got you.
So you're always at capacity no matter how many tons is on this graph.
Correct.
That's, I think, the piece that was
Thank you.
missing is I kept thinking, wait, where's the capacity?
Yeah.
I think Amazon and having more boxes and things is going to make more cardboard, right?
Yes, and we're finding more and more cardboard within our system.
Right.
Yep, as we go. Yep.
I don't know if this is exact right time to ask, but I'm going to ask anyway. We're talking about, it looks like statewide or nationwide, an admirable recovery rate of 59.7% that we need to get up a little bit more, but it's still very good. So everything that goes to Covanta that is burned, not the stuff that is separated out and that we were just talking about, is that included in the 59.7%, or that's the 40%? So everything that burns in Covanta is not classified as being recovered?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And I'm sorry, I don't want to jump ahead a little bit, but on page 16 of the handout, there's a graph about the energy inputs and outputs, specifically on the medical waste. Between 2016 and 2017, there was a pretty significant jump, and that medical waste portion has been increasing substantially. Would you like to offer an explanation or a forecast as to what will happen? I'm just thinking is in the terms of recycling and sanitation, that waste is usually pretty, it's already been kind of tapped. You can't really pull much out of it.
Correct.
So if you could just offer some more, how
Yes.
that relates to this process.
So we have a capacity limit set for the medical waste that's coming into Covanta. So we're, in a sense, 16, 17, 18 are ramping up to those levels of about 10,000 tons per year within a facility. We have our in-county medical waste program, also that's a portion of that waste stream. But you definitely see an uptick in that volume in 16, 17, 18 when we signed a contract with Covanta to handle the Stericycle material.
Does the city or our ratepayers, do they benefit from that outside contract? Does it lower the tipping fees overall?
Yeah, so we'll get into kind of the funding mechanism down the road where we'll get into more of that detail.
Okay.
Apologize to kind of get you started there.
Sorry.
Madam Chair, thank you. So, Brian, one of the things you might want to mention is as the burner has gotten older, that it has to shut down for certain facility issues, updates, et cetera.
Correct.
So that impacts the amount of tonnage as well, as they've done some of those repairs in the recent years.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
This is this graph. So based on what you're saying, Commissioner Cameron, it's at a lower operating capacity because the capacity itself is diminished? Because as the facility ages, it's not able to process as much?
So as Cavana operates on a regular basis, they have what we call an outage or down, where they do regular routine maintenance and then any additional upgrades or requirements that are needed at those times.
And it was not performed in a higher year like 2009, or the regulations were different then and didn't require?
No, those are all being performed as we go through as this process, yeah. What you'll see is timing effects, where we may have a longer outage or maybe a second outage where we'll have additional work that's being done within the same season that'll have some impact on those numbers. But it's tough to kind of take all the evenness out of that with the peaks and valleys. It's a lot of it's based on that makeup of the waste that's coming in. The plastics, the cardboard that we talked about, and the wood volumes. So.
Right, if I could also tag on to a question, didn't we, the contract you were talking about, isn't that the blue bin and the gray bin waste that we went through? So we were approached, right?
Right.
By Covanta to say, would you
Yep.
have a contract and up the amount? So we had a cap at a particular level and we upped it for that. Can you just describe that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, Dennis will touch on this when we get into the funding mechanisms and I know,
sorry.
move quicker. We're not quite there yet. So we had some budget shortfalls approaching us with changes in power purchase agreements and the market value of our revenues coming in with the power generation, where we were losing about $4.5 million a year. In addition to that, we had metal recovery that we were doing at the Ash Monofill, where we were seeing a reduction of about $1.5 million to $2 million a year in revenue. So netting about a $6 million loss. And we were looking at options to generate more revenue, and Cavana approached us to have them incinerate blue gray bin waste from Stericycle, and that was coming at a much higher tip rate offered. Our rate today is $87.45 at Cavanta. This stream comes in at somewhere closer to $550 a ton, where we split those proceeds pretty much down the middle at 50-50. So that helped bring up that shortfall, along with our tipping rate increase October of 16, where we raised tipping rates $20 to that $87.45 I mentioned.
Just to clarify, when you say you split them, it's between Marion County and Covanta?
Correct. Yep, and that goes in with our environmental services funding that funds the solid waste system. Correct. Okay. All right, I'll try to kind of bounce through these a little quicker. Again, talking about volume coming into our demolition landfill. Again, this graph's more to depict kind of what we see in the seasonalities or the years with the improved economy. So again, to see the peak in 07, kind of a recession, and now we're back into that boom period again. From a capacity standpoint, we're looking at about 12 to 14 years remaining life at these kind of volumes. So we're looking to try to find other ways to process material like this. We do have a new business in the county that's actually processing drywall, which makes up a large portion of this. So we hope to bring these volumes down and recover that in the future. Salem Kaiser transfer station, as I mentioned, again, significant growth, 10 to 15% annually. And again, I would say it's at capacity, if not over capacity, just from a customer engagement, where we're having lines where we're having customers wait for an hour to an hour and a half. So again, kind of needing some additional help there on a transfer station side. North Marion, again, smaller facility, but more capacity. It has material room to grow. Just from its already makeup and design, so we can handle more customers, and again, kind of shift some of that would be beneficial to the system. So again, in the GB report, we started saying, what do we kind of look at? What do we need for the future? But understanding our makeup, what are we talking about? Let's talk about tons generated within a system. And you see where we're getting the green line is our total generation per year in Marion County. And we've now topped out at over that 500,000 ton mark. The blue line depicts the disposal, what's ending up at Cavanta, what's ending up at end rest spots at Browns Island or even Coffin Butte. And our recovery rate is kind of that red portion, is how do we keep this going? And then, what kind of where that recovery rate comes from. And I touched quickly earlier on kind of the the makeup of Senate Bill 263 and some new goals. And we have a new goal in Marion County of 64% recovery by 2025. Again, that's lofty. As Councilor mentioned, the 59%, DEQ used to give credits for additional outreach and education that totaled 6%. So really, you have to back those numbers down. So when we talk about 59, we're not really 59 anymore. Yeah, that we're more in this range now, hovering right about 49%. So that next step to get us to 64 is going to be significant, and we're going to have to do some ingenious things.
Why is it going down, the recovery rate?
So when you look at the numbers, generation is just outpacing recovery. So our recovery is actually slightly increasing, but our generation disposal is growing faster than that. So your net is that you end up with a less recovery number. So, okay. What's the future look like? So DEQ just recently completed a waste composition study throughout the state. So we are evaluating just that. How do we get ourselves to that next level? How do we get to 64%? And evaluating the different things in the stream and what's its makeup and how can we recover that? Key pieces to look at, again, paper, plastics. Again, keeping in mind, when this was done, it was prior to China market and things changing and what's recyclable and what has an end market. So you have to kind of take these numbers with a little bit of grain of salt. One to focus on is kind of that other inorganics, and that's a lot of the material we take in at Browns Island landfill, about 30,000 tons a year. So that's a big portion of where, if we can get the drywall or the sheetrock recovered, get the roofing converted into asphalt, which is now becoming more regularly accepted, we would be able to diminish that disposal, which will then increase that recovery number for us. So just some of the things that we're looking at and evaluating as we move forward. In the GBB report, the solid waste energy report, again, the focus was, again, utilizing the best uses of how do we recover material, how do we get it to the final best resting spot. They looked at our current conditions, where we're going, kind of where we talked about the roadmap and where material we're at today. Covanta being what we say capacity full, they're taking every ton that we can. Every additional ton is now going to the Marion Resource Recovery Facility, in a sense, to either be processed or to be then transferred off to Coffin Butte as kind of that backup opportunity. So whether there's an overflow or an oversupply of waste, or if we're doing an outage and need backup, Coffin Butte's our outlet there. Yep.
Why is recovery energy from waste second from the bottom, as opposed to, I can see how reduce, because if you reduce it, you don't have it either way, but I guess I'm comparing that to reuse and recycle compost. There must be something more hazardous about recovery energy from waste as opposed to recycling compost and reusing?
So EPA is the one that actually came up with the waste hierarchy, and it was their evaluation of what's the best, highest use of that material, what's the most desirable. Again, to your point, don't generate the waste. If you can, reuse the waste. Composting or recycling is the next key. And then again, if we can get some energy out of it before we dispose of it, that's why it's down next to the landfill.
Considering what might happen from let's just say the burning at Covanta, in terms of where it goes, you're just talking about what is in the hierarchy of the best ways to do things.
Yeah, from EPA standpoint, they felt that recovery or energy from waste was a higher use than going to direct disposal.
Councilor Cook?
Thank you. You had mentioned exploring other alternatives. Can you delve into some of the alternatives that have been discussed?
Yeah, so the alternatives that were evaluated were, again, one, just pure landfill. Everything goes to a landfill near us, which I'll talk into some more detail about. They also explored the mixed waste processing, where, again, when this was done prior to the Covanta, or pardon me, the China market change with our recyclables, mixed waste processing would then look at more of our again, that dry, wet stream and take that to another level of recovering more of the paper, the cardboard, and possibly even segregating those streams so that you could get a deeper organics fraction and recover that also, along with taking those other materials to a recycle market. So again, allowing some additional capacity that would allow for growth at, in a sense, Cavanda, where that material would go to a higher, better use. That's one of the options. Again, the other thing they looked at was the expansion of the energy from waste facility. One option was we have currently two boilers or two burners, incinerators. It'd be adding a third that would kind of take that capacity kind of half again as much as what we have. So instead of about 180,000 tons, we'd go up 90,000 tons. And then another option that was kind of looked at was going kind of the all in and going 200,000 tons worth of capacity.
I thought I read in the report that the expansion was no longer being actively considered.
Correct. The evaluation there was basically pricing and a number of other factors that have led us to kind of put that on the sideline for now.
Well,
So-
Brian, I'm sorry, wasn't it Metro that was also kind of driving that discussion about adding?
Definitely.
additional boiler.
They were really looking for that kind of mega piece of getting that capacity as an alternative to landfilling about 1.2 million tons a year.
So if I'm understanding correctly, then the alternatives that were discussed were landfill, mixed waste processing, and expansion of the current waste-to-energy facility. Is that correct?
Correct.
So no other considerations outside of that?
No, other
Well,
than.
yes, in the sense that we actually looked at whether there was different technology, right, in the waste energy.
Correct.
And Commissioner Brentano went and saw one that was what, gas? Can't
It
remember.
was, we went and looked at one, it was still a mass burn, but it was in Tulsa where they control the amount of oxygen coming in and for a higher combustion and reduction. But
And that was kind of the latest, greatest thing, but then there was something about that that didn't pan out as well as they thought.
Yeah, there's gasification. There's some new technologies that are not yet proven, that do not have a benefit yet, that are not kind of the standard in the market, where these are kind of more the tried and true portions.
And then just a tag-along question as far as new ways to look at the situation. I know now the county, especially because of the recycling changes, is working on the reduce factor to help push out that messaging. Is there anything else besides community campaign or awareness campaign that the county is actively working on to lessen the waste stream? You've said several times in this presentation the amount of cardboard and the amount of plastic specifically, which are able to both be recycled. If there's a facility that takes them nearby, what are we doing about that?
So we'll get into our programs and talk about our mass recycling programs, our education, our outreach. We are focusing in the new year more on the consumption base, trying to get to what can we do instead of and other aspects.
But you're focusing on consumption and not production.
We're not going up the chain, from a generation standpoint. We're more focused on how can residents help us impact this.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Can I just add something to that, though? Some
Yep.
of the things the Solid Waste Management Advisory Council's been talking about, particularly is multifamily. That's been a really hard nut to crack, because if you're trying to get people in apartments to recycle, there's a space issue, there's an education issue, that kind of thing. We've been also talking with the companies or organizations that do a lot of food waste, because the idea, like, if we put our food in composting as residential, it's just like this much of the waste stream, but if the state hospital does that, or the prison system does that, or whatever, all of a sudden you have, or restaurants, what in the world is that? You have a gigantic opportunity to really pull some things out of the waste stream. So those have been some of the things that we've been talking about, right, Brian, to take a look at in terms of actually affecting consumer behavior.
Thank you, Commissioner Carlson. So do you have your large producers that you're aware of based on the waste that comes in then? If we're assuming,
I didn't hear.
I'm looking at the large producers then. We have in the diagram, the business and then the residential. And like you were saying, the residential may only account for a smaller percentage. And finding out what the barriers are within those larger businesses, whether it's recycling or composting or waste reduction, could have a larger impact than a a overall awareness campaign that's
Right.
not specifically targeting people. So I guess I'm encouraged to hear that you're having those discussions, and I would be interested to hear how that can incentivize for some of these larger producers.
And you may have heard of Earthwise. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a program where they go into each business individually and help them. I mean, it's like we did it in Marion County for Courthouse Square just recently, and checklists and figuring out like what kinds of light bulbs you use and what kind of paper you use in the copy machine, and just every element of what you do. And so that there have been feature articles about that. It's business by business. So I mean, it's not quick. But, and Alan Pennington's here, and if you have more questions on that, he can actually speak right to the Earthwise program. So that gets at part of it. And I think in some instances, when we were looking at food providers, there were reasons why either they didn't want to do it or it just didn't work out. But I know we've been working kind of, again, business by business to try to tap those.
There's a bit of a cost component that we're running into, whether it's storage or containers or different things, working with the haulers. To kind of touch back on the Earthwise program, we've recently filled that position and kind of shifted Alan's roles, but Rachel, who comes to us now, has this food background, and we're hoping to kind of help drive that more through our businesses and look at opportunities for either recovery before we work at even composting.
So not to take us too far off the beaten path, but in looking at this program like Earthwise that the county has set up, since the county is the governing body to decide where the waste goes, if a larger city like Salem said, you know, we want to reduce our waste, we want to be able to lower payments for our customers, we want to be able to be more efficient for our haulers, how would Marion County be able to interface with City of Salem to be able to offer that same service? Is that something capacity-wise that
Yeah,
being able to look
I
at?
think using the expertise of our haulers, they're going to be the ones that help us figure out how to kind of that stream appropriately in the most efficient manner possible to do just that. Yep.
And I think, if I could add, I think we welcome the active engagement. I think many of the cities, other than figuring out what their rates are, really haven't been as actively engaged in the discussion, and it's a tough nut to crack. I mean, you can see with all these dynamics going on at the same time, and the history that we've had, and what we have now, and if we wanted to change tomorrow, you don't turn on a dime, you know? I mean, you've got to like completely alter a system. So whatever, we have the Solid Waste Management Advisory Council that advises the board. There is a City of Salem employee, right, that is actually on that. Is he the chair right now, or is he?
He's currently vice chair.
Vice chair, who's chairing the meeting when I came, is it right?
Correct.
Is it Ryan?
Keith Bogdan-Wynn.
Oh, Keith.
Right, yeah, so he's been
Great.
involved, and we've been, actually had a presentation on the plastic bags and, getting people informed on things, and but I just want to make sure that it's not, we didn't just commission this study and then like have a piece of paper and then go, okay, well, you know, we've been working on this the entire 16 years that I've been here, and it's going to go on after I leave, and it's very, very, as I mentioned earlier,
I hate to
complex.
interrupt, but I know you're halfway through your presentation in the first hour, so I don't know, maybe even show it up some more, then
Yep.
let's.
Yeah, we need to have some
answer
time for
questions,
conversation.
Definitely.
At the end.
All right. The next slide kind of takes a real deeper look at some of the capacity out there in landfill. If we were to go look at just landfilling, the four sites that were looked at were Coffin Butte, Wasco, which is out near the Dalles, Columbia Ridge, which is in Arlington, and Findlay Butte, which is even further out in Boardman. And you can kind of see here, local capacity for landfilling is getting used up and consumed. Riverbend and McMinnville is looking for an expansion, but running into difficulties. And again, Republic's Coffin Butte has somewhere in that 30-plus year range, but not a lot. You have to go a distance to get some real capacity for the future. Trying to kind of tie back to one of the questions were around cost, and this is something that was addressed in our report too, is they were looking at, if we were to go that route, what would it be? What would be the mechanism, again, moving that kind of volume of that 170 to 180,000 tons a year, and some of the pricing equivalents that we'd see on the side. So basically we're ranging from about $51 a ton up to even almost $70 a ton. And these are now about a year and a half old as far as our numbers we're looking at. So again, I'll quickly touch on this. Tipping fees versus collection fees versus disposal fees. Again, we kind of talk in numbers in the industry. Tipping fee is those things that are paid from our franchise haulers when they go to Covanta, to a Garten for disposal today, where we now are for our recycling, we're paying to drop that material, and Marion Resource Recovery again for processing. Our public customers do the same thing when they go to our transfer stations or when they go to Browns Island. The tipping fees that's collected within the county is the largest contributor to our environmental services fund. So now taking that into what you deal with on a regular basis when your haulers come with a cost of service analysis, which was just completed here this last November. The tipping fee is incorporated in that. So that disposal fee from them going to those facilities is incorporated into their cost structure that it then translates into the collection rate that we see at the curb that we deal with. So kind of talking into the funding of environmental services again, our tip fees are the biggest piece of this. We have franchise fees as we collect 3% from our franchise haulers in the county. Interest that's generated on our reserves. Again, not that interest rates are fantastic these days, but again, that contributes to the fund. The electrical revenue from Covanta, it's a split. We actually receive 90% of that and Covanta 10. And then we split the proceeds with the ferrous metal that's recovered also. And in turn time, that's improved over the years. So I'm going to have Dennis kind of dive into the numbers for us a little bit deeper. So.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, City Council and Commissioners for your time this evening. For the record, I'm Dennis Mansfield. I'm the Administrative Division Manager for Marion County Public Works. I'm going to go through a few slides. It's going to be the financial makeup of the environmental services, our revenues and expenditures. And I have a couple additional slides that have our 10-year forecast from a few years back in 15-16 when we were actually looking at a tip fee increase, and then actually a 10-year forecast as we see it today. Before I actually get into that, I want to discuss a little bit about our annual budget process. We have our regular meetings and presentations to our budget committee like everyone else does, but we also add another component. You heard just a minute ago Commissioner Carlson talking about our Solid Waste Management Advisory Council. We call them SWAMAC. We meet with a subcommittee with them semi-annually in April and October of each year. And we kind of take a deeper dive, and I understand that you have actually a packet with some examples in there of the financials that we review, some year-over-year comparisons, some forecast comparisons, and budget comparisons. And in October, we usually are kind of looking back at how we did in the prior year, and in April, we're actually looking at the current year and actually looking into the next year. So getting started here, we're looking at a graph of our revenue. You'll see the biggest piece of our revenue for fiscal year 17-18, which actually totaled $26.2 million, comes from Covanta, 55%. Our electrical revenue that Brian just spoke to, that we share 90% of that revenue, is about 6%. And then also ferrous metal that is being recovered out of Covanta makes up about 3% of that. It's also their share.
I have a question about the tip fees. I notice it says from Covanta. That's really from our garbage haulers paying to tip at Covanta, correct?
That is correct.
Do you have an estimate on what percentage of that 55% is coming from City of Salem haulers or City of Salem customers?
Oh, I don't have that actually off the top of my head.
Anybody back here know?
Yeah. Make a note of that. Make sure we get that separated for you.
Thanks. It's probably around 40%. It doesn't include Kaisers and the rest of the county, so I'd put that as a number you probably aim at.
So then moving on to the...
Just to clarify, 40% of the 55 or 40% total?
40% of the total volume.
Thanks.
North Marion transfer station tip fees make up approximately 7%, and then the Salem Kaiser transfer station is 22%, and then a mix of the others. The investment earnings are franchise fees, and then just a small percentage for services rendered to other departments. On our expenses side, we saw $22.4 million in operating expenses in 17-18. Our Covanta contract makes up almost half of that at 46%. Our transfer station contracts, so we have at Salem Kaiser Transfer Station, we have Republic Services operating that facility, and we also have, and also hauling that material, as well as at North Marion Transfer Station, we have Republic Services hauling that material away, and those contracts make up about 22% of our operating expenditures. Personnel is 10% of our operating expenditures. Our leachate disposal, I don't think we've actually talked about leachate, but that is actually the byproduct of when it rains on our ash monofill, that water has to be disposed of appropriately. It makes up 3% of our operating expenditures. The ash disposal, which is now going to Coffin Butte landfill as beneficial reuse, makes up about 4%. Public education and outreach to the community is making up approximately at 1%, DEQ fees 2%. Our household hazardous waste facilities is about 1%. Administrative charges, so that is our our human resources, our information technology, finance, and our legal services, and then all others, so all the miscellaneous other expenditures as well as our capital expenses to operate the business.
I want to underscore, too, that we have to pay Coffin Butte for them to take the ash for that alternate daily.
That is
So
correct. Yes, we pay to ship it and
So it's not a
dispose of it
revenue
there.
raiser for us, it's a
Correct.
cash out.
Go into our reserves here. So we have a target reserve of $20 million, of which almost half of that is actually required by DEQ. This is for closure and post-closure costs and 30 years of post-closure costs. We have 2 sites that this impacts, the North Marion County Disposal Facility, where our ash has been for several years, at $6.1 million, and then also our Browns Island Demolition Landfill, which is approximately $3 million. Additionally, we're looking at keeping an environmental reserve of approximately $7 million, which was requested by the Board of Commissioners several years ago at both of these sites, and then also a large capital improvements, including landfill caps, leachate lagoon covers, so that the rainwater doesn't actually come into the leachate lagoon, as well as transfer station maintenance and improvements. I will say, though, we haven't, since I've been here, I've been with the county for 6 years, we actually haven't been able to meet those reserve targets. We do, though, meet the DEQ required reserve, which I'm actually going to speak to now. So this is the slide of our net working capital in 15-16. There's also the red line there is that required reserve by Department of Environmental Quality. So there's a few things I want to point out here. There in the first couple of fiscal years, you see on the left-hand side, we had our metal recovery project up at the North Marion Transfer Station. We were investing in some capital equipment, and you'll see there as it in 13-14 goes into 14-15, we were finally starting to see the full picture of that system operating. But unfortunately, things shifted dramatically there. And in 14-15, I would say, we started seeing a decrease in our ferrous metal rates. In fact, in January of 2014, at the peak, we were seeing $204 per ton in revenue, and by September 15, so less than 2 years, it had dropped down to $44.25 per ton. And in September 15 was when we actually decided to stop the operation because it was no longer financially viable. Additionally, another thing that Brian actually had brought up was our electrical agreement between Cavanna and PGE. That really shifted our financial piece for us. We were in in fiscal year 13-14, we had received $5.6 million in electrical revenues, and in 14-15 that dropped down to $2 million, and in 15-16 that dropped down to $1.4 million. So it's a reduction of $4.2 million a year in electrical revenues that we weren't seeing anymore.
Excuse me, Dennis.
Yes.
I mean, clearly, the blue line's going way in the wrong direction.
Yes.
You're going to be negative in a few years.
Correct.
So how is the county going to address that? And
So this was in 15-16, so this was 3 years ago.
Okay.
This is before we increased the tip fee.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So this
This
is
is
the
the-
scaring one, and
Right, yeah.
the next
This is
slide
what we were-
should
this
make
is
me
what we
feel
were
a little
looking
better
at
about
that
the
led us-
county's.
Right, yeah,
We
right,
were
yeah.
staring at this.
Right,
Correct.
yeah.
You got scared back then. And
Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
And then so coming into current, so this is with our fiscal years 2017-18 actuals and our fiscal year 2018-19 budget in here. So you see there's the $20 per ton tip fee increase that took place October 2016. A couple things you'll note here in this graph. One is the Cavana contract expires September of 2019. For the purposes of this graph, we are showing no fiscal change to that. We are still in negotiations with Cavana, and so for what we're looking at here, we are simply just noting if we were to continue forward with no fiscal change to the Cavana contract.
And I'm sure you pointed that out to Covanta, where the blue line is going below
Yes,
in your
yes.
negotiations?
Yes, Cavana's fully aware of our
Yeah, there is somebody from
situation.
Covanta here too, if I recall.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, he's here. And then lastly, as you've heard Brian talk to a couple of times over at the Salem Kaiser transfer station, the volume there of customers is significant. Hour and a half waits is not uncommon on the weekends. So we were actually looking at expanding our transfer stations, and Browns Island is one of those areas. So for forecasting that, we were looking at about a $10 million investment with a loan of approximately 20 years. So that's where you're seeing some of that drop off. The other piece about this, and I didn't speak to it in the last slide, is a lot of our contracts have CPI increases, like many do. Our Cavana contract, our transfer station contracts, our leachate disposal contracts, and ash disposal contracts all have CPI increases. Those are significant expenditures. So just to kind of illustrate, the Cavana contract, right in fiscal year 17-18 was $10.3 million with an escalation of CPI by 27-28, which is that last area on that graph. It's going to go up to about approximately $12.8 million. So you're looking at a $2.5 million increase per year. And again, we're not showing any additional tip fees that we are instating. We're just showing what the potential is based on current.
CPI?
Yes. Consumer Price Index. So it's a common.
Just to clarify.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Dennis.
Back to one of your other slides, we were talking about capital improvements. I could be wrong here, but my understanding is the current plant there in Covanta maybe has a 30-year lifespan, and we're beyond that. What, if any, are the plans to either replace it or, oh, Sally says it's here? Okay.
Yeah, there's the maintenance page.
Okay.
I'm looking for it right now.
But,
I think if
well,
you-
I mean, my real concern is how's it going to be paid for, not so much if we've got that idea.
Yeah, go ahead.
Matt Marler, I think it's important to hear what they've done in the first 30 years, because the idea that it's a 30-year-old plant is like, my house was 30 years old and I've never, like changed anything in it, and I don't think that's true, so.
It is not. So my name is Matt Marler. I'm the business manager for the plant, so I get to come here and do this in addition to a lot of other things. But to answer this question specifically, and I have some other things I'll present on in a little bit, but over the course of 30 years, we have poured a lot of money into that facility to maintain it and maintain an availability of at least 95% every year. So that's on time in a given year. So, you spend a lot of money to do that, and we will continue to do so. We make guarantees to the county that we will be available, that we will be online for certain periods of time, and we are on the hook for capital expenditure, maintenance on an ongoing basis. So in the future, that 30-year, I'm not sure exactly where that came from. The facility was originally funded on the basis of it wasn't exactly 30 years, but it was a 25-year PPA. And I think that's kind of where that number came from. It has nothing to do with how the equipment
Power
actually
purchase agreement,
performs.
right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry. Slow me down if I'm going too fast. But the life of the equipment is really directly correlated to how well you maintain it and how you fund it. And the proof is in our availability. So 95% availability rivals nuclear power plants.
And that means 95% of the time you're operational?
That's correct.
Okay.
So there was an earlier comment about, decreasing volumes at the plant. That doesn't have to do anything with the equipment. We take outages every year because you have to maintain the equipment. So there is a week or 2 weeks for a major downtime every year, and that's been true for the life of the facility. You've got to take it down. You've got to work on common systems. You've got to test things. You've got to do things that require you to turn it off for a period of time. That's true no matter what. And so there's one period a year where you do that. It's 2 weeks. Then we do a minor maintenance outage again. Kind of, you do it sort of semi-annually, so every 6 months you're doing a big one, then you do a little one, and that's to continue to make sure that the equipment works appropriately. The volume, the capacity constraint has to do with the heating value that was discussed overall. The facility is designed at a certain set point. You produce so much steam for a given ton of waste. That was designed on MSW at the time. To give you a sense of numbers, that's 4,500 BTUs a ton. So that's how much output you get for a ton of normal waste. Well, if you throw wood in there, that's about 3 times that. If you throw plastic in there, that's 3-4 times that. So you have the same heat for far less volume. It shrinks my overall capacity is what that does. So I hope that
Since
helps.
you're up here, can we just flip to the energy from waste and landfilling affecting the environment? Maybe we could come back to tip fees depending on what the time looks like.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And
All
this
this
would
is
also get into the particulate question that Councilor
Yeah.
Cook had.
So let's talk about the environment. And let me preface this by saying I can't do justice in the time I have right now to go through. There's a lot of science behind all of this. And so please, I'm happy to come back and do a far lengthier presentation, or please come tour the facility. Come see us. That's true for the public. We do tours to anybody and everybody. We want to share the story. But this is a piece of it. So I'm at near the bottom of the hierarchy, and I'm fine with that because there are higher and better uses for materials. I acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, there's something left over, and you've got to take it somewhere. It can't pile up on the curb. If you think you get calls about rates, wait till you get calls about garbage piling up on the streets. So you have 2 options, really. With today's technology, there was mention of some other technologies that I hope in the future truly will become commercially demonstrated, scalable things. There's neat stuff. In a previous life, I worked on gasification. It's cool stuff. It's just not there yet. So today, you have an option of going to a landfill or you come to me. And when we talk about the differences between this, and particularly how it affects the environment, we have to talk about methane. And I'm going to skip ahead then, just in the interest of time. There's a bunch of information here about some differences, but methane's really a key component of that, and what is the environmental effect of all of this. So I think I get to, yeah. So let's talk about methane. So out of my facility comes a certain amount of carbon dioxide. Off of a landfill, you have methane emissions. It's well established. It's the third largest source of man-made methane in the country. Comes off of a landfill. Now, a lot of the data that I see out there, and it's unfortunate, really, because it's based on very old data. Scientists, as they get together, and there's these, climate change committees and things that get together and do this. It's not my company producing this information. They assign a global warming potential for methane. So that's how damaging it is compared to carbon dioxide. And back in 1995, they figured that number to be 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide over 100 years of that molecule being up in the atmosphere. Well, over time, they've learned more. And today, or nearish today, that number is gone up to about 84 to 86 times as potent over a much shorter lifespan. So that means that the damage that a methane molecule does up in the atmosphere happens really quick, and it's very pronounced. So that is what's coming off of a landfill. I don't produce methane. So when you factor that in, then, and actually, I'm going to come back to this if that's okay, because I want to talk about this. So when I talk about the value of energy from waste as compared to a landfill, so it's no secret, I produce carbon dioxide. We report that to the DEQ. They monitor our output. This amongst a bunch of other things that I'll get to in a second. But there's 2 kinds of carbon, really. There's what's called biogenic carbon, and there's anthropogenic carbon, and I'll explain that. So biogenic carbon is what's already been part of the natural inventory. If a tree is cut down, turned into paper, and then reused, recycled, or burned, or whatever, that CO2, that emission, because even if you're putting it in composting, you get heat off of that. That's not, there's something coming off of that. But when the EPA looks at it, they say, well, that was a renewably derived carbon. It comes back. So that paper then, which is burned or used in some other way, gets made back into another product, or it's turned back into a tree, or it's called the life cycle of carbon. And so there's a certain portion of the waste that comes into my facility that's derived from renewable type things, wood products and paper products and things. And so that will eventually return back into the whole life cycle of carbon, okay? And that represents the green portion of that first bar. Now, there is a portion of that that is not from renewably derived materials, obviously. We go out, we drill for oil, we explore, we mine, we do things, we turn that into plastics, we use and consume those things, and eventually they end up in the garbage, which comes to me. I burn that. That is the anthropogenic portion. That's the portion that I am required to report to the likes of the DEQ and the EPA. So when you're doing carbon accounting then, the EPAs of the world, the DEQs, they don't count the biogenic portion because that's part of a natural inventory. It's not hurting the environment any more than the natural occurring CO2 would. But the anthropogenic does add to that. So we need to be concerned about it. We need to account for it because you can't put an oil-derived thing back into the earth. You don't get to be part of that life cycle. I hope that makes a certain amount of sense. So that's what comes out of my stack. So if you're using my facility then, there is fossil CO2 avoided by using my power. So if you turn me on, you can turn a coal power plant off. And that's better because that's all fossil-derived fuel. Then I recover metal, so you don't have to go mine for it. So company-wide, my company recycles the equivalent of like 4 to 6 Golden Gate bridges a year in metal. That's metal that otherwise you don't have to go look for. So you save some methane or some greenhouse gases on that basis. The biggest portion of it, and this is the green downward bar, is the methane part. So methane does more damage to the environment. Scientists have established that, and I avoid it. If it comes to me, it doesn't go there. And so when you factor all of that in, and this is an Oregon-specific number, you save a half of ton overall of carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere by avoiding all of that stuff to the landfill. So what the EPA has said and stated that energy from waste is, I think if it's not the only technology, it's one of the few technologies that actually reduces the overall greenhouse gas impact in the world. European Union uses this technology extensively. They do a lot of science on this. EPA does as well. So all of this is derived from their information.
Thank you. As far as the emissions from the waste to energy facility, we've talked a lot about greenhouse gas in this, which I know is a concern. Looking at the air quality in general, it looks like that's your next slide. And as far as the upkeep on page 5, what can you tell me about my scrubbers? Is that the right word?
That's one of the pieces of equipment. So actually, let me just explain sort of what some of the pollution control equipment looks like. So in a modern energy from waste, and and I'm using modern to apply to this facility. You build new. And this was the first facility to have a bag house in the United States. In fact, it would let out in the new sort of generation. So the bag house is what controls particulates. So if you think about a diesel truck going down the freeway, they rev up and you get the big black cloud of nastiness. The bag house is what controls that. So you use like thousands of vacuum bags in a series to collect and control the particulates. So that's why you don't have a black cloud coming out of the top.
And do you monitor,
Yes.
So in the same way that if you vacuum up something you didn't expect to vacuum and you go through the filter and you say, oh, look, I found 72 coins, or
Yeah.
what is the data coming out of the bag house then?
There is extensive data that we capture, all of which is reported to the DEQ. We have a continuous emissions monitoring system. It monitors particulates being one of them. So if, like on this, these are all reported, and the blue doesn't show up super well, but all of your heavy metals, dioxins, SOx, NOx, all that stuff gets monitored.
what's concerning to me about a chart like this, and I understand there are limits and those change, but even if we are below the permanent amount, that still means that in the case with lead or cadmium, these reoccurring heavy metals that can be persistent in our environment and have very detrimental health consequences, that's a concern. And while it's wonderful that you're meeting the requirements that you're required to meet, what steps are you taking in the future, especially when I see the report showing that in the same way that you're saying we're keeping up with the maintenance issues, just like taking a ship out of the ocean, putting them in dry dock, or taking your car to get the oil changed, you're doing that work. I'm just having some questions about this slide.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think anybody concerned should. I would hope that the proof is, yeah, I have limits. Look at what they are. Look at where I'm at. I operate, in some cases, almost 99 to 100% below that. I go the extra mile. And technology, the only one that I even get close to is nitrous oxides, 16% below permit level. And that's, new technology is evolving today, and my plant is on a schedule to hopefully receive those reductions for that. The DEQ has lower limits than the federal government set, and they did that because they came to us and said, hey, you guys are doing a good job. Can we lower your limits? And we agreed to do that. So am I going to be able to allay every concern you have? Probably not, but I could sure do a lot better than a landfill. And I am continuously driving those down.
And when the ash is disposed in the landfill, aren't those same materials there? In which case, I mean, the dioxin or the mercury or the lead or cadmium, it's not like it disappears.
This is air, so this doesn't come out as part of the ash stream. I mean, there are constituents in the ash stream that look kind of similar, right? Heavy metals and things, what you burn comes out. But, one of the things that I get asked a lot is, well, gosh, matter is neither created nor destroyed, so it must be there. Okay, that's true. I agree with you, but it can be converted.
Physics.
Yeah, well, it is.
Glad we can agree on that.
Well, that's
Councilor
good.
Anderson.
But it also can be converted. So it can be contained. So if you think about sodium as a great example, take a salt. So we use table salt all the time. It's NaCl, right? Sodium by itself is explosive. It oxidizes in air and will kill you in its natural form. But if you couple it with something else, it becomes something else. That's what I mean by conversion. So take mercury for an instance. That's one that we want to be very concerned about. So your first step is to do what Marion County does excellently. You take it out of the waste stream. We don't even want it there. So we have a mercury collection program. So that when we're talking about reduce, reuse, recycle, that's your first line of defense. And they do a fantastic job of that. Well, some of it's going to arrive. It's going to happen. So I use charcoal, activated carbon, and it binds that and inerts it. And so the ash that comes out of the facility then, yeah, it has molecules of mercury in it, but they are contained, and it passes very stringent testing to ensure that it's a non-hazardous product. I do quarterly ash testing on that, I do a yearly characterization, I do a lot of work in partnering with the DEQ to make sure that those things don't present health risks to the environment, or people and the environment, to say.
Councilor Anderson.
Thank you. This is a good presentation, and I think I will at some point take you up on your offer to come out there and look
Please
at
do.
the place.
It's very interesting.
My first question is, where are these readings being taken in relation to the plant?
At the stack for this.
Okay,
So
so
this is
all-
a stack test.
All these
So-
readings
yeah.
we're seeing are average for what comes
Right.
out of that stack.
Yeah, so the way that this works is you hire a third party because you have to have impartial data. The third party comes, I mean, we have ongoing monitoring ourselves, so we capture a ton of data that they get to review, and the DEQ does too. But every year, you bring in a third party testing company to come in and perform these, extensive tests, and this is the data that they produce.
So my understanding is Metro decided not to send their garbage to you, and part of their concerns were related to kind of environmental justice issues, that what was happening
Yeah.
in the area of your plant.
Well, that was a piece of it.
Well, let's just talk about that piece as opposed to maybe they had some other concerns
Sure.
that would be relevant to Metro, not specifically to what happens at the plant. So could you address that kind of the environmental justice sort of issues, that something must be happening if they had that concern?
Well, their concern was less over environmental justice. So I don't want to dodge the question. I'm not trying to do that. It had less
Well,
to
so
do
far
with
you're doing a
environmental
pretty good
justice,
job,
and it
yeah.
had more to do with money and the data that they produced on the differences between landfilling and energy from waste.
Okay.
And I could take you through a whole huge presentation about why they were very wrong in their conclusions. That's essentially what
and
happened.
all I've heard is anecdotally that
Yeah.
there is some concern about what is happening to the land and the crops and the people who
I just
were-
got to interrupt now. That I don't know where that came from. The fact is, we weren't even sure we wanted them. We were investigating it because we wanted to have some more capacity and
Yeah.
thought we could bring
Well-
some time. But they also had other issues with they had fights among themselves with their different hauling agencies or disposal agencies fighting for that waste and not wanting it to
Yeah,
come
no,
in. So say it was environmental, it's absolutely
I said that was part of it, Sam, and that's what the man said there, Dennis said too. I'm curious too, because I have heard, and so this is what we're here, to get some facts about it. Is that true, is that not true? That's all I'm asking.
It's really not. The environmental justice piece wasn't really part of that. I was part of the final presentation they produced. They flashed up a slide about my cost versus going to the landfill, and that was the end of the story. So, again, I don't really have anything else to produce or to discuss at this point, but again, it's a very long conversation. There's a lot of misinformation out there that utilizes data from 20 years ago, which is really unfortunate. And so I'm happy to offer more, present more. Please come see the facility.
One final question. Appreciating the information that's come today, but also looking at the microclimate in our area, particularly being in the valley, and how air quality affects us. So I know we've talked about the particulate matter in general, but in relation to just general air quality, are we only relying on DEQ? How?
Well, I can't really speak for the DEQ. That's not fair to them, but I mean,
so we talked about the waste-to-energy facilities in other locations.
yeah.
When they've made shifts or changes, they have unique environmental factors around them. Are we taking into account the unique environmental factors that affect our air quality in Marion County? Specifically, the valley,
Yeah.
how this microclimate works?
Yeah, again, I can't speak for the DEQ, but my understanding of that process certainly is air modeling. There's a lot of work that's done, and especially when the facility was first built, to do all of this work, and understand that, and I'm sure that's updated. I can't speak for the DEQ, but that's the idea, right? You take into the unique characteristics of the air shed, so there's waste sheds, there's water sheds, there's air sheds, and you do all of that work to look at it. And, when Portland was assessing, I don't like their data, but when they're, and it's not because it's unfavorable to me, I mean, we could go into that, but as part of that whole assessment, again, there was a discussion around air quality and water quality and all those things. So
Well, we got some additional funding, is my understanding, because of the air quality in our region. Is that correct?
Well, that wouldn't be attributable to me, I promise.
Well, I appreciate your promise.
I mean, if you consider sources of, things in the area, I-5 is the biggest concern anywhere and everywhere, so.
So even if the facility itself is not the main generator of it, it still is in the same, it still has to be responsive to those impacts
Oh, yeah.
as well. We're all affected by what happens. in
Absolutely.
this
When
region.
regulations come down, we're regulated right along with it, and that's fine.
Okay,
That's the environment.
thank you.
I think this slide speaks in some part to, if you look at it, to the,
Yeah, if you want to talk
Impacts.
about dioxins, so dioxins are created whenever you burn something. So if you think about a campfire that's uncontrolled burning, don't breathe the smoke. It's sort of my 2 cents.
forest
Free. But forest fires, so this is,
forest and air source.
yeah, it's number 2. So landfill fires are the single greatest source of dioxin emissions in the U.S. Over time, so what's interesting is, and again, where a lot of the misinformation today comes from is 30 years ago, energy from waste was that's the green bar on the far left from my perspective. They were a very significant source of dioxins. We didn't, technology and all that good stuff, we didn't understand it, we didn't know it, we didn't have it in place, but over time, I'm down to about 26 where it's at almost, negligible at this point. And today, the single greatest source of dioxin emissions is landfill fires, because unfortunately they catch on fire. Forest and brush fires, backyard burning, agricultural burning.
And this is for the country as a whole.
This is US-wide, so as a average across the US. So Oregon specific might look slightly different, but landfill fires would be way number one for the last couple of years, unfortunately, just by virtue of the events that have happened.
And just to be clear, the ash from Covanta still goes to a landfill?
It does as daily cover. So the landfill operates on a daily basis, right? All the garbage that comes in there on a daily basis gets pushed into the, wherever they're putting it, the hole, I'll use that term. And then they're required by law to cover that every day, so, to try and keep out pests and to attempt to control odors doesn't work. But you do all of that by law, and so you either have to go get new material, new dirt or something to cover it up, or in this case, they use our ash. So it's considered a beneficial reuse from that perspective.
Brian, did you have more?
Always. So, kind of fast forward, we definitely want to get to questions. One piece that I want to kind of circle back to, because I know this is a question that Mayor Bennett, I think, asked me specifically on the 13th of November, was trying to kind of come up with a dollar number associated so that we could kind of do that comparison of a tip fee at Coffin Butte compared to a tip fee at Covanta. So what we have here for you in the slide is that attempt to kind of try to illustrate that. Keeping in mind everything we've talked about with our value-added programs, with HHW, the infrastructure, and that integrated solid waste system, pieces and components of that fall as part of the responsibility of this facility to help cover those costs, right? So when you see the contract price, and I apologize for the black on the dark blue, is about $60.95 per ton for that. What I want to clarify at the top of the slide is we talked about $87.45 per ton, but the weighted average is more of $82.56. And that's again based on some of the streams of the waste that come in. So we talked about curbside collected material, but when we talk about a drop box load, those are brought in by the yard. So depending on the weight of that material, that's what fluctuates and changes that weighted average. So when we look at this graph, if you add up all the numbers, it's not going to add up to 87.45, it'll add up to 82.56, just for clarity. We didn't want to just put percentages on there because I know that the mayor was looking for more of a definite number. But then you kind of go around the pie chart and you'll see those additional costs with ash disposal, leachate, our public outreach, the DEQ fees that we pay. It's a kind of portion of the HHW facility, the household hazardous waste, and then the little piece of personnel is actually the staff at Covanta. We run the scale house and is staffed by Marion County for all that incoming waste. So it's just a kind of a fraction. In those administrative charges, that's people like myself, that's our engineers, that's our staff that's at our site, to kind of coordinate and work through education and outreach, our public outreach portion. So kind of a breakdown as best we could to kind of give that answer.
So I thought I read in the material that we were presented that a few years ago the rules were changed, and so some of the revenue was used in non-waste areas. Is that captured in this graph somewhere?
So today, there's no non-waste areas. So when we talk about kind of our program, the environmental services funding, as we said today.
Can I respond to that?
Please.
And it's on a text here, let me just grab it. So when we had the courthouse square issue, and this was before we had the problem with the metals declining, that graph that Dennis showed you. And so we didn't have a crystal ball, and we were on the 30-year contract, and we were getting $6 million a year in electrical revenue. We were looking for a way to repair Courthouse Square without going out for a bond, and we got some insurance money, we borrowed some money, and doing it internally. So in 2010-11, Public Works said they would be able to share $4.8 million of the reserves that we had in the solid waste fund. And then in 2011-12, we took another 4.8. In 12-13, it was 1.7, and in 13-14, it was 1.3, for a total of 12.6 million. That's the only money that we've taken out of the solid waste fund for other purposes. But in order to do that, we did have to change the ordinance because it said it was exclusively for solid waste purposes. That was kind of a crisis situation where we were looking for revenue, and we didn't believe at the time they said that they could do it, that it would affect programs at all, because we didn't see where that blue line was going down, because we were in the midst of that. But other than that, the only thing I think that the fees pay for, solid waste fund pays for administrative charges, so that's the closest thing to, I mean, and every department of Marion County, and I'm sure that's true in a county you're familiar with too, is assessed on the basis of FTE, amount of budget, accounts payable, accounts receivable. There's a formula. We had Moss Adams, I think, came in and did a big study, and they're assessed that. It's for, as Dennis said, finance, IT, legal, HR, facilities, costs. So that little portion there is the only thing that you would say was not directly attributable to the solid waste fund, but it's assessed as every other fund is in Marion County.
So it's not an ongoing practice to take
No,
money
it was that emergency that we had with Courthouse Square that led us to do that.
Thank you. That wasn't clear in the material, so thank you for clarifying that.
What is the benefit received from the classification from the EPA that the waste for energy facilities are renewable? What's the benefit that if that subsidy were to change or the rules were to change, how would that affect Covanta?
Matt? Yeah, I'll kind of look for Matt to explain that for me.
If I understand the question correctly, you're talking about the renewable energy aspect of it.
If that were to change going forward?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I can't answer it very well because they haven't set a price for those very well. So there's not really a market for those renewable energy credits yet. We produce them, but there's not really a market for it yet. So I don't know exactly, because the way those work is take a PGE, for instance, and they're required over time to reduce their use of fossil fuel energy, so coal plants, is the easy target. That obligation on them hasn't really begun, and so I don't know what the value of that is, but I can tell you that when that happens, and if I lose that status, there will be a pretty significant impact when that market arrives. So I can't answer it today exactly and give you numbers because the market doesn't exist yet, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And Councilor, that was put in the coal to clean bill in 2016. We actually got that power considered to be renewable. So it's very recent that we got it in the renewable portfolio. So
It was renewable, but as of a certain year. What year was it that it kicked in?
it wasn't until 2025, I think, so we
Right,
moved
yes.
it up.
Right.
So it's
And then
now
that
renewable.
was changed again, actually, to be renewable in 2016. So it started at that and then slid back. So we're renewable today.
Oh, are you?
Today,
Okay.
Yes.
today we are renewable, but it would, before we
But
got
that's
that bill
right.
done, it wasn't
Yeah.
until 2025 that it was going to be renewable.
That's correct.
So we got that in the bill that passed the legislature back in 2016 in the short session.
Thank you.
So I'd like to shift the conversation for a minute. I know we're running out of time, but one of my motives for requesting this meeting was, I've only been on the council 18 or 19 months, and we've had to raise garbage rates twice so far since I've been on the council. And based on my limited understanding of the system and conversations with Commissioner Carlson, the county makes a lot of decisions about things that impact what we're required to do in terms of rates so our haulers can stay in business. And it seems like we have a very passive role in the whole process, and it's really, we set the rates, but it's based on things that we don't control. So I'm curious, what can we do as a city, and I think the largest provider of waste into the system. What can we do to be better partners to help reduce your costs so we can not have to raise rates for our residents and just keep the system whole?
And I'm going to turn that over to my fellow commissioner here in a second.
You're not going to like my answer.
Well, no, but let me just say that from what I heard, the relationship, and I mentioned this earlier, the city was not interested at the outset of actually having any responsibility for this. So your characterization of the city's role in this is fairly accurate. And so as Commissioner Cook, was mentioning, Councilor Cook, was mentioning earlier, I think that there is room for us to have more intensive or intentional conversation about how we work on this together, because we need every assistance we can to get the word out. I mean, your neighborhood associations, I have said this before, where's Art Kenzie? He was at Elna when Suzanne actually had him there and did, I thought, a fantastic presentation that everybody should be able to see.
Agreed.
About, took photographs into 15 people's recycle bins and showed plastic. People were putting their recycling in those plastic bags. It was just like, really? And then some, misconceptions about dog food bags, and is it paper, or is it plastic, that kind of thing. And ESNA, our neighborhood association, he came and did the same thing there. So, if we can actually spread the word to get less contamination, if we can get more businesses to do the Earthwise program, there's so many ways, and we spend money on outreach like you're talking about, but people don't log on to the Holler's website to take a look at these things. They just don't. So if we can get their attention through all of the different ways that you have to do outreach to your constituencies, I think that would be great. And then what did you want to say that you don't think they'll like?
I did want to say, but you got at it. The one thing I can think of is to help clean up the recycling so that truly can be marketed and fulfill what recycling is supposed to be. It isn't just collecting it, hauling it, then throwing it away. It has to go somewhere and be useful. But what I think you were really getting at is what can you do, what can the city do to help hold down costs? The problem is every one of these programs you look at, whether it be
batteries,
well, let's just stick with some food waste, and you hear different cities getting more and more into that, and we've talked about it. But there's an expense to it. It doesn't lower the rates. If you want to remove more of the waste stream, there's a cost to it. So it doesn't answer what you want. But that's still where we're going, to try to find everything we can to minimize that number. I'm just give my little speech. I should have started this. I wanted this tonight to be this, that Marion County, I'm so proud of it. We recycle, you've heard this before, I've said it too many times, I've said it for 30 years, but we recycle everything we can before it goes into the burner. And you've heard Brian and Dennis talk about all that we do to do it. And then we put it through the burner, we pull electricity out of it, we sterilize it, we reduce it. It's inert material, if you were getting at whether it's going to burn when it gets in the landfill with other fire. I don't think so. Maybe it gets so hot. Sterilize it, and then we found a use for the final product, the ash. We pull the metal out of it. There's nowhere in this state, and probably nowhere in this country, that has a comprehensive program for handling solid waste that we do here, and I'm so proud of it. Yes, we pay more, but we pay because we're trying to do the best we can for the environment. And the last would go to you're trying to find something about air quality, I think, in the county. You got to look at those numbers, not just the permitted amounts, the 1%, the tiny, tiny bit we handle it. I don't know how we can do better.
And we got an award, right? We came in second in the nation in our
Yeah, we
integrated
should've got
waste
first.
system, right? I know that you keep saying that. So.
I think Commissioner Cameron had a comment, then Councilor Cook.
Councilor Cook.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'll go next.
I wanted to thank everyone for their time today and the commissioners for coming down and working on this. And I wanted to thank Councilor Hoy for his leadership on this issue. I think that when we're talking about our communities, it's great to see the passion that everyone brings, and it's great to hear this history. I would like to make a motion to have staff prepare an informal report on zero waste and what that might look like for Salem moving forward, to coordinate with Earthwise and Marion County to be able to have a coordinated effort, because certainly Commissioner Brentano and Commissioner Carlson and Commissioner Cameron, as you're talking about we have options where maybe costs would increase, maybe costs wouldn't, but if we're working together, we'll have a bigger impact.
To clarify, are you making the motion now, or you'd like to at some point in the future?
I can make the motion when it's appropriate.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson?
Thank you. I'm gathered by that it might be appropriate at some council-only meeting.
Yes.
But I think, Commissioner Carlson, when you said there was a time when the city didn't want to have anything to do with things, that time is
Long time
ancient
ago.
history.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, maybe around the time that the Covanta and the whole plant was started. So I think it's clear from today and other things that we would like to have some sort of coordinated effort. So when Councilor Cook makes her motion at the appropriate time, I'll be responding to that. And, you know, it seems to me that the more information we can get out, the better we can work together. And I really think there are kind of two issues here. One is raised by Councilor Hoy. We got residents who are saying my rates keep going up, and what we're going to do about it. So that's kind of one, just the fiscal issue. And the other issue is the environmental issue, that what is happening and how does it come. And they don't necessarily affect each other, but they could. And what we really need to do is have all the information we can on both of them. And I can see Commissioner Brentano's points that the more we work on the environment, that might end up with an increase on the cost. But if that is the case, we need to explain it to people.
Right, and I think one of the things Brian didn't mention in the comparison with Polk and Marion is that Polk doesn't run the same level of programs that we do. The transfer station, we actually collect data on how many people with 97304 zip codes come across the river and use the transfer station, the battery program, the household hazardous waste program, those types of things. So I think that it's important to kind of see the whole system, and I think in many ways Marion County then is providing a service to those Polk County residents, but they are just not including it in their rate.
Yeah, subsidized, basically.
Commissioner Cameron?
Thank you, Chair. I guess
Commissioner Cameron?
I've been, Madam
Go
Chair.
ahead.
Chair Hoy, what's your title tonight?
It's all right.
Mayor Chair Hoy. I just want to say thank you for having the meeting and allowing us to have this presentation. I think one of the things we need to really remember is we live in a place where if you travel to a third world country, garbage doesn't get picked up on people's streets like it does here. I mean, we take this for granted. A lot of our citizens take this for granted. And I think one of the reasons we're here tonight is obviously because the costs continue to go up. Is that a cartoon with me in it? Probably. Sam probably put that in there.
The Superman I left out, sorry, Commissioner.
The costs continue to go up, and it's got all of our attention in here. And as you can see from the graphs that we've been looking at, how do we try to bend the cost? But one of the things I want to echo my fellow commissioner, we have one of the finest programs, obviously in the state, but maybe in the country. So one of the things that we've talked about tonight is these costs that are impacting our citizens, impacting us, and we're having to pass it on to the citizens. But in the long term, we have some real challenges ahead of us. And, you know, the burner is at capacity. Where do you site a landfill? Where do you put another burner? What is it that we're going to do? We've got decisions that we have to make, whether that's a material recovery facility that gets more material out of it, that's going to cost the haulers some money. We've got big decisions, and we would love to communicate those to you and educate and get your input to it. But I want to go back to one of the basic things that we could all do that's sitting in this room. We have a master recycling program in Marion County, and I would suggest that every councilor, you've done it?
I'm a master recycler.
Great. Every councilor and take that class, because the thing we've been talking about tonight is we've been talking about recycle, recovery, and landfill. We haven't really talked about the top two on the DEQ chart here, which is reducing. What do we do in our own personal lives, and how do we educate people to reduce when they go to the grocery store? What are they buying? What are they taking home? How are they doing it? How are they reusing things? And so I really appreciate Councilor's point about what can we do, and I think it's an education that starts with ourselves, and anytime we can communicate, whether it's at we've got educators that can come out to neighborhood association meetings, to schools and everywhere. We just had a presentation last week with the annual calendars for the drawing that we gave certificates to students throughout the whole Salem Kaiser School District that did the calendar. Does anybody bring a calendar? I should have thought.
I think we have them in our bags.
You got them in your bags.
Yeah.
So there's programs like that we're doing, that our staff does that educate in our community. And so anytime you see some of those things or can help us with those, I think we're open to continuing to get the word out. But I really wanted to draw attention to the hierarchy and how, it starts with how do we reduce something, how do we reuse it, and then recycle, and then obviously we have the further ones down. But I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk tonight, or to listen basically, and be re-educated on this.
Well, and the more you know in terms of this data and how the system works, the more you're going to be able to help us analyze and figure out how best to approach the situation as well. So.
And when you do get to go to the facility, make sure you sit in the chair and operate the crane. That's fun.
Did they let you do that too? We have he ran a striping machine in Marion County. We have some real issues out there on our roads.
Some of our road stripes are a little crooked.
I've noticed.
Okay.
We've got to get to a few questions, and I'm running out of time. So if we could, and we'll stay as long as we can.
Absolutely. Other questions from councilors?
I think they're done.
There was some from the public that you wanted to
We
give an
want to take public comments. Understand that not everybody might be able to stay for that, but we would like to open it up for public comment. I do not believe we have a sign-up sheet, so we'll just, folks want to come on up and line up, and do we have a timekeeper? Dan's going to keep a fairly informal
Got a timer on the cell
time,
phone.
and I'll just sort of give you the heads up at 3 minutes. We're not going to have the lights on tonight, it doesn't look like. So, Suzanne? If you'd introduce yourself and your ward or address.
Yeah, nobody knows me. My name is Suzanne Kaltwasser, and I live in Ward 8. And my comments are kind of based upon speaking before you had your presentation, so I'm going to slightly modify them. But we sent you a list of questions from a group of concerned citizens that represented Salem 350, League of Women Voters, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and other concerned citizens like myself. And those questions all came from the documents that you were provided. They're public documents, and we thought, we read these documents, and these are the questions we had, thought that they were relevant for you. So I think some of those questions might have been asked and answered, some of them not. But what I really wanted to say was thank you, both to the county and to the council, for having this work session. As I listened to the conversations you're having, my vast experience of 25 years said these people need to get some background and some understanding, and so I think tonight really went a long ways to do that. And I hope that it's not the first and only. I hope it's one of many, and I'm very encouraged by the willingness to work together, because we all live in this environment together, and we all have to be working on proper solutions. I will say that some of the questions that you asked tonight, I was thinking there might be some alternative information that you want, and we get all of our information. I get all of my information from the DEQ, the people that are actually working on it, or from the websites of Coffin Butte or Covanta. So we can give you that information so that you can ask your questions directly to the people we talk to at DEQ. There's several of them, because there's a lot involved in this. It's a very complex issue. We're hoping that at some point the City Council is going to go through a process to develop a climate action plan. And dealing with greenhouse gases is going to be an important key to that. And we wish that there was more data that DEQ collects on the air quality and stuff, and they're not there yet, unfortunately. So Cleaner Air Oregon is it has been working on that, some new rules and regulations, and there might be some more monitoring. But going forward, we think that's really, really important. And so we're just really, really feeling positive about the fact that you're taking an interest in this. It's been a long time coming for a person like me, and to hear people that are receptive to it and willing to work on these together. It's a big, complex issue, but I think that we can get there if everybody is working, citizens, advocacy groups, governments, and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Linda?
Hi, my name is Linda Walmark, and I live in Ward 3. And I'm speaking tonight for 350 Salem, Oregon, which is a climate change activist group. And I do thank you so much for all of the information that you brought, and you've given me a lot of food for thought. We've been looking at this issue for the last year, and we realize that it is an extremely complex issue. So we appreciate all the things that need to be balanced. But we are a climate change activist group, and we are very concerned about the fact that it is the highest single point source emitter of carbon dioxide emissions in the county. And it's the 19th on a list of 86 different carbon polluters in the state. So there's still a lot of questions that I have when I look at this list from the DEQ of all of these 86 that are listed in order from the most heavily emitting down to the bottom. I see that most of the landfills fall below Covanta. So I still have some concerns and questions about that. I take great heart from the fact that you are interested in, hearing our voices and in working with the city, because I have been concerned about a sense of real disconnection between the two. I do have some strong concerns about any effort to try to have a long-term contract with Covanta. I think that there's just too many, the future is very volatile, it's very uncertain, and that we need to have a short-term contract, maybe a series, I don't know, but I do not want to see us locked into a really long-term 20 or 30-year contract. So that is our main concern. But I thank you so much for this evening. It was very, very productive.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Shepke?
My name is Jim Shepke, and I live in Ward 2, and I'm going to talk about a very specific issue, but it has to do with reducing. So I am going to talk about reducing. And let me just, as background for the councilors, at your November 13th meeting, you were looking at the latest rate increase. And in your staff report, there was a report on every other week service, and that's what I want to talk about for just a minute. And it said that in February 2018, staff reported that Salem haulers would offer a 20-gallon every other week service starting in April 2018. But following this report, 2 franchisees covering the majority of residential customers in Salem reached out to customers that would most likely benefit from the service. These customers were those currently subscribed to 20-gallon a week service. But as a result of this outreach and offering the 20-gallon every other week service, only 1 customer has signed up. Well, I stand before you as the one customer. I'm famous in Salem. I'm the one customer that gets 20-gallon a week every other week service. I didn't get that as a result of outreach. I didn't get any outreach. In fact, I called Republic and asked for this, and the people I talked to there knew nothing about it. So what I did is I sent an email to Mr. Zinke here, and he helped me out. He put me in touch with somebody at Republic, and they called me, and I'm all signed up. And I don't want to lose it. And I think that it definitely is a way to reduce. And if you think that people can't do this, can't have every other week service, all you have to do is look at Portland. Because in Portland, there is almost 700,000 people that get every other week service. It's the norm. It's what they do in Portland, is every other week service. And it can be done You know, you have to work really hard at it to not fill the barrel, you know, in a week. But it can be done. So I'm just suggesting that to our council as maybe something to look at in the future. Maybe Salem could move to every other week service. In Portland, you can get a bigger, you can get a 35-gallon for every other week. They don't all do 20-gallon every other week, but it can be done, and people can break their old habits, and they can buy things that they don't have to throw away, and you know, there's just all kinds of ways that we could transition to every other week garbage service. So I hope you'll think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to make a comment or have a question? All right, well, I would really want to thank the Board of County Commissioners for coming to City Hall and meeting with us. I think it was very productive. I learned a lot. I know more now than I knew earlier, and I appreciate that very much. So I hope this is, like one of the commenters said, I hope this is the first of many conversations regarding waste and waste reduction. And if nothing further, I'll call this meeting adjourned.
And I will adjourn the meeting of the Marion County Board of Commissioners.
We recycle these.